Every parent of an autistic child can tell you something about making lists. In the early days after Ethan's diagnosis at the age of 3, I made them compulsively. Words he understands, words he uses regularly, only a handful at that point. Songs he can sing at least part of. I also had lists of goals composed in bursts of optimism for what he'd be doing soon. 6 months from now, he will count to 20, follow 2-step directions, tell a stranger his name. At the time, I believed these lists kept us focused with our eyes on the prize that I made our #1 parent goal on Ethan's first preschool IEP, or Individualized Education Plan: to enter kindergarten without an autism diagnosis. That was my thinking during our early years in the autism trenches, before we'd learned how complicated and naughty the battles could get. Ethan was diagnosed just after his 3rd birthday by a gruff doctor with a thick accent we had a hard time understanding. At the start of our appointment, we'd tried to put his developmental delays in the context of a larger picture of medical issues. He'd always been a colicky infant, so prone to sinus and ear infections he seemed to wean straight from the breast onto amoxicillin. He'd had food allergies, terrible eczema, and for the last year and a half, diarrhea so severe we'd never bothered to start potty training. "Yes, this is autism," said the doctor, who seemed to be missing a few social skills himself. "The first thing you must do is lower your expectations. Don't assume he'll get a job. Hope that he can do a few things independently. Get dressed, feed himself, things like that." I was outraged, of course. Ethan was 3 years old, and this doctor was already outlining his limited future? My fury dissipated after I did some research and discovered that over half the children diagnosed with autism had experienced chronic ear infections and gastrointestinal issues. The more I read, the more this diagnosis seemed less like a tragic pronouncement on Ethan's future than a thrilling explanation for the constellation of GI problems he'd had all his life. Here at last was a connection, and with it a ray of hope. There were diets to try, therapies to get started on, children like him who were improving physically and catching up on missed developmental milestones. I read every story I could find of an autistic toddler who'd recovered completely. The nonverbal 4-year-old who went from lining up cars to reading Harry Potter. The teenager who'd left his diagnosis behind and now had a girlfriend in a software design company. In these stories, parents described the extraordinary effort required and made it clear this wasn't an undertaking for the faint of heart. These children will resist being drawn out of their shells. They'll turn over tables and try to hurt themselves. They were right, I learned, and my heart broke as I watched Ethan resist, sometimes sobbing for hours, much of what we were trying to do. In the beginning, I often returned to those stories of cured children. I needed them because suddenly I had a full-time job I'd never applied for or wanted. I baked every night with the grains that would not aggravate his immune system. I lined up play dates, joined support groups, made flashcards and posted them around the house to surround him with language in manageable doses. I played on the floor until my knees ached, teaching Ethan the rudiments of pretend play. Should we make this banana a phone or a car? Early on, I'd learned to ask a question with choices buried in it, so an answer was right there for him to grab. I narrated his world as he encountered it, and I stopped thinking entirely about how I looked, because what did that matter when there was a child to be saved, and this was what it took?